Let us pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. You know, chances to preach on something from the gospel or the letters of Paul, they're a dime a dozen. We get a psalm every week. But as far as I can tell, this is only the second time since I've been at Epiphany that there's been an opportunity to preach on Habakkuk. And honestly, Habakkuk is one of my favorite books in the Bible. And I think a book that has a valuable word for us here at Epiphany. And so that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to talk about this little book called Habakkuk that you may not have even known was there. But because this is so rarely encountered in our readings, I'm going to start this morning with a little bit of background. Just what this book is, what it's about, who wrote it, when they did that. And it'll probably be helpful if you would follow along with me. So if you pick up your own Bible or a blue pew Bible and turn to page 785, we'll talk about Habakkuk this morning. Well, first, if we just look at the book itself, some things are immediately obvious. It's short. This book only has 3 chapters, about 3 pages in your standard Bible of text. It's part of a series of short books that come at the end of the Old Testament. They're called the Minor Prophets. Some of the other books that you may have heard of around there, a book of Amos, for instance, or Hosea, or Zephaniah, Nahum, the book of Jonah, you know, the story of Jonah and the whale. That's one of the stories that's in the Minor Prophets. Now, when we hear the word minor, we tend to think, what? Unimportant, right? Little. But the sense here really is just short. It's not that these are partial books or second-class books. They just happen to be on the smaller side, and they were gathered together for that reason. So that's just a little bit of very basic information about where you find Habakkuk in the Bible. Well, who wrote it? When did they write it? It'll surprise you to know that a man named Habakkuk wrote the book of Habakkuk. And we actually know a little bit about him. He was, in the 7th century, he was a choir director, a music leader. And he wasn't just any music leader, he was a music leader at the temple in Jerusalem. So he is an important music leader. You could kind of say he's the, where is Jimmy? There you are. He's the Jimmy Crawford of prophets. So what situation is Habakkuk responding to, this music leader at the temple in Jerusalem in the 7th century BC? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Life is a mess in his neighborhood. Nothing's going right. This book covers about 70 years of history of time, and almost all those years are bad around Jerusalem. Things get off to a lousy start when Habakkuk is a young man, when a king, a man named Josiah, who's ruled for a long time and is, from what we know from other sources, a very good king. He chooses the wrong side in a war between superpowers. And if you're the king of a small kingdom and you choose the wrong side in a war between superpowers, what happens? Yeah, he dies. And the person that gets his position after him only lasts 3 months. And then, to make matters worse, they get one of Josiah's no good, no account relatives, a man named Jehoiakim, as the next king. And he won't enforce the law. Or when he does enforce it, it's very selectively done just to serve his own interests. And what we have in Habakkuk is a man who has had enough of this. And that's what we hear in chapter 1 this morning. Starting at verse 2. "Oh Lord, how long shall I cry to help and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence and you won't save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. The law is paralyzed and justice never goes forth." If we had to just kind of sum this up and put it in more contemporary language, we might say something like this. Lord, why are you letting all these people get away with being jerks? You know, this is a good question, isn't it? We read Psalm 1 this morning, and it doesn't sound like that is what should happen. It sounds like the wicked will be blown away like dust, it says, and the righteous will flourish like trees planted by streams of water. What's going on? I mean, sometimes it works out like Psalm 1 describes, but often it doesn't. Other times, lots of times, it just doesn't happen that way, does it? I mean, we fill out our tax return honestly. And the guy next to us cheats, pays less, and never gets caught. We lend our neighbor our lawnmower, and he moves out next week and just loads it on the truck. Maybe that's happened to someone here. I mean, this can be really frustrating, can't it? The sense that justice doesn't seem to be working. You know, I had this experience when we moved out here to Northern Virginia. We put our house in Pittsburgh on the market. And I find out a couple months later, one of my neighbors waited till we were gone to totally destroy all the landscaping around one of my property lines, just because I wasn't there to say no to it. Couldn't do anything about it. I mean, come to think of it, I want an answer to this question. Why do the jerks seem to get away with it so often? What does God say to Habakkuk? Let's look at verses 5 and 6 in chapter 1. He says, "Look among the nations and see wonder and be astounded. For I'm doing a work in your day that you would not believe if told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation." God's response is something like, you watch. I'm sending down a really mean group of people that will make the people that you're dealing with look like wimps. That is not the kind of answer that Habakkuk is looking for. Not the kind of answer we would look for. I mean, he clearly is hoping God will deal with Jehoiakim locally. He wants the good guys to win. He probably has a pretty clear idea who the good guys are as well. He doesn't understand why the best thing that God can do is introduce a new group of jerks to this situation. You know what? That's how we are as well, isn't it? You know, we don't get excited when someone says, yeah, that person's kind of difficult, but I'm sending somebody that's going to make them look like someone that is, what was I going to say there? A wimp. We'll go with that. There we are. And we know, as we look at Habakkuk, we know that he's looking for a different answer here as well. We can see that clearly in how he replies. First, looking at verse 12 of chapter 1, he says, "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die." Habakkuk is really nervous about this proposed solution that God has put forward. And I think we get that if we understand particularly that last phrase, "we shall not die," really means something more like, we won't die, right? This isn't going to backfire terribly, is it, God? And he goes on in verse 13 of chapter 1, and he basically rephrases those first few verses where he starts his prophecy. He says, "You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent? And the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he." That's nice, God, that you're going to send these jerks to take care of those jerks. But generally speaking, if you hate evil so much you can't even look at it, how is it cool for you to use one group of evil people to take care of another group of evil people? Where are the good guys, God? So to bring it back to us, when we found ourselves in that place in our life, why doesn't God give a satisfying answer? Why doesn't he give Habakkuk a satisfying answer here? Well, I think it's pretty simple, really. True good guys are really thin on the ground, aren't they? God puts up with jerks. He even uses jerks for his purposes, as he says he's going to do here in Habakkuk, because he doesn't have a lot of other options within the human race. I mean, quoting from several spots in the Old Testament, Paul sums up the human situation this way in Romans chapter 3. He says, "There's none righteous, no, not one. There's no one who understands. There's none who seeks after God. They all have turned aside. They have together become unprofitable. There is none who does good, not even one. That was true in Habakkuk's time. It's true in Paul's time. It's true in our time. This is the difficult truth about human nature. We have a hard time doing the right thing even when we want to. A lot of the time, we don't really want to. Paul says more about this in Romans chapter 7, verse 19. He says, "For the good I will to do, I do not do. But the evil I will not to do, that's what I practice." You know, probably the place these words came home to me most clearly was at a church called Shepherd's Heart. It's a really neat congregation outside of Pittsburgh. And at Shepherd's Heart, almost everyone who's a member of that congregation, who serves there, who leads there, is in a difficult place in life. Often folks are homeless. They're bouncing back from some terrible event. And the reader that service was reading Romans 7, got to this verse, said, "For the good that I will to do, I do not do. But the evil I will not to do, that I practice." Standing right up in front of the congregation, stopped right there dead. Said, "Ain't that the truth?" Kept reading. Friends, he could see the truth that we often try not to see. So, Epiphany. How are we going to deal with this? I know for a fact we do not have to go back 2,700 years to see cases where it seems like the jerks are going to win. Most of us probably don't have to look back more than a day or two. And sure, you know what? Sometimes it does give us a little bit of pleasure when we see our Jehoiakim of a boss overrun by the Chaldeans of accounting. But often it's kind of scary, isn't it? It leaves us wondering if we've been fed a lie about good triumphing in the end, about God's own goodness. Because it does seem so often that the way life actually works is worse triumphs over bad instead of good triumphing over evil. So let's go back to Habakkuk. How does Habakkuk deal with this pattern? He can see it playing out in front of him. How does he deal with getting an answer he doesn't understand or even like from God? Now, he has some options. He could have just stopped asking. He could have stamped his foot and said, "I can do better. I'll go get a God that will make sense of this for me." Or he could do, I think, the thing that I'm often tempted to do, which is pretend to understand something I don't actually understand. You know that temptation? Well, he doesn't do any of those things. We skip ahead to chapter 2, verse 1. Habakkuk states his question, gets God's answer, restates his question. God basically gives him the same answer again. And then in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, "I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me, what God will say to me." The conversation isn't over. Habakkuk is willing to wait. That's because Habakkuk ultimately trusts God to be who he says he is. And Habakkuk realizes that ultimately he's in no position at all to even begin to comment on the choices God makes about the universe, about how the world works, about who the world will see in charge. Habakkuk realizes clearly that whatever God does there, he is not in charge. And all he really can do is wait and see if God will say something else that helps him understand the situation and gives him hope. If we go on, God does actually say something else to Habakkuk, something more. Something, I think, that casts light on this question of how we deal with the reality of the world, this place where worse does seem to triumph over bad, at least as much as good triumphs over evil. I want you to look now at chapter 2, verse 4, just the second half there. Part of God's word to Habakkuk as he waits. And God just says, "The righteous shall live by his faith." Faith in what? Well, friends, faith that God is actually good, even when we don't necessarily see that working out in other people around us. God's telling Habakkuk that trust in that trumps understanding. That the hallmark of being God's friend isn't necessarily that you're always going to see good beat evil right now, but having faith that God is indeed just as good as he says he is. Look, God's saying to Habakkuk, things are going to be messy. Really, the best thing I can do about this bad Jehoiakim is to send the worst Chaldeans down upon him. You got to trust me on that. But have faith. I am good. Good without compromise will triumph. In the end, evil will ultimately go down in defeat. You know, friends, this is the moment in Habakkuk that we actually have to part ways from the prophet a little bit. Because our situation's a little different than his. And simply put, we know something he didn't know. Something that's very, very, very important when it comes to taking God at his word here. We know without a shadow of a doubt that God's promise that he is good and that good will triumph is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Finally, we know in Jesus, someone truly good, Jesus, meets true evil, sin, and death, and gives them the butt-kicking they so richly deserve. We should cling to this, particularly in moments where we see the Jehoiakims and Chaldeans in our life swarming around. And we fear that we might be stepped on in the process. Yeah, life is messy. Yes, good wins in the end. God is good. Yes, it takes time, but we will not always have to deal with partial solutions to the problem of evil. You know, knowing that reality, that thing that Habakkuk didn't know, actually makes it easier for us to join him at the end of his book in chapter 3, where he has chosen very clearly to hope in God's goodness again. And here's the thing. Habakkuk makes that choice of hope without anything actually changing on the ground. Things are still bad in his neighborhood. But still, he ends his prophecy with a psalm, a song we don't know for sure, but was probably written for that choir that he was a director of, the temple in Jerusalem. And its words are powerful. Listen to them. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. In other words, I see no sign of God's goodness around me. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. Habakkuk chooses to show his trust in God, not because God rides in like a white knight and fixes everything, but because he trusts God's promise that he is good and that God will eventually have victory over evil. We, friends, we on the other hand know that that victory has begun, that God's salvation has blossomed through Jesus' epic battle with sin and death on the cross. So, this week, as we leave this place, let's claim that victory, that reality for ourselves at home, at work, at school, wherever we are. Wherever it seems in your life right now that the jerks are winning and the best thing to hope for is maybe some jerks from somewhere else will come in and clean those guys out. Know that good wins, that God is good. And in Jesus, that victory has begun. So, when we see our neighbor trampling on our property rights and wrecking our landscaping, we remember that Jesus has already won, that this is not the way things will be forever. Our office politics and alliances get so messy that it seems like there's no one we can actually trust. We remember that Jesus has already won. This is not the way things will be forever. Friends, no matter who seems to be winning in your life today, Jesus won yesterday. And in the end, his victory, his goodness, God's goodness, will be confirmed forever. Amen.